This is the good cross-examination question of, have you run the data to show if reading this book actually makes you better at understanding the data?
I have been speaking so much about the book, I haven't run any data on that. Once again, I don't have hard evidence yet. What I have is a lot of positive feedback on the book. So one of the things that was really important to my co-author and I when we wrote it, though, was that we actually do build into the book what we call how to be a better consumer of data. At the end of every chapter, we have these 4 or 5 guidelines that we give on averaging, on cherry picking, that really do give practical guidance to people. I mean, it was very important to us, and hopefully you can sense from my tone, the educational component of this is a very important piece to me. That's sort of where my passion comes for this. So it is important that people leave and not just say, well, we heard this interesting story about the space shuttle, or boy, that A&W hamburger story, that's crazy. But also, how do I be better wired? And so hopefully those tips at a minimum is advancing that. I guess the audience will let me know, but I hope so. So look, I struggle with this, right? And I'm not going to pretend that my book can sort of give you everything, but I look at, my example always is fitness, right? I work out and try to always slim down, and what do I eat right? And I find it to be this huge, crazy, difficult world to interpret. And I'm a trained statistician, and I can't even make sense of it all the time. And there's still times you'll hear that ad, well, you can lose 10 pounds with this new diet supplement, taking ginseng. I'm like, oh, that sounds really interesting. And I'm like, no, wait, pause. So it's so innate in us. I said, even me, who's written a whole book and talks about this, I still think we're prone to, there's that part you got to just hold back. So it's just the awareness.
Okay. We're going to work from the back forward. So, ma'am, in the glasses, yeah. So the question is, how do you feel about the government collecting its own data versus purchasing it from outside sources?
I think that it's something that has to be done with great care. All right. So here's sort of it is expensive and complicated to continue to collect large quantities of data. There are times where that might be a very important and vital role for our government to play. Labor statistics is one that I think of, where as a trained labor economist, where I use labor statistics all the time, that's a pretty important function, and the government does that as well as anyone, right? We have sort of a labor program, our Bureau of Labor Statistics data at least is really quite sophisticated. There are times, though, where private sources can either get better data or do it more carefully, but once again, it has to be vetted carefully. Are there inherent biases? It just requires, it's not as simple as, okay, we're going to get the data. You're still going to need a system in place to evaluate what does that data mean? Is that data being collected in a way that is consistent with accepted scientific practices and the like? So I think the great caveat is buying the data doesn't obviate the need for the government to continue to closely monitor and figure out the data collection piece.
Okay. Next row forward, we had a question. So I think the question there was about sort of screening the data and trying to sort of filter out the bad data and how to truncate it and go.
We mentioned data cleaning before. So data cleaning is the concept that when you actually get a data set, it never comes ready to use for statistical analysis. As I said, I tell all of our brand new data analysts at my firm, you understand you're going to spend 50% of your next year cleaning data sets, which means, are the names consistent? Are the fields consistent? Where is there missing data? What data is not fully populated? Does the data represent what it says it does? All right? That whole input process is actually vital. I don't talk a lot about that in the book because that's a whole, now we're going back a whole nother level. I talk about data quality and being aware about the sourcing, but that issue is vital because, once again, choices that are made there can drive the results. So I remember I sort of started with this notion of what I called robustness. When I see a statistical analysis, I want to know what's driving the results. I think of an example I had where a key result in a matter I was working on was entirely driven by the definition of a customer's name. And if the customer was grouped together with several subsidiaries, one result came from the analysis, and if they were split apart, you got a different result. The cleaning critically affected the statistics, and I wanted to know that, right? So I keep encouraging people, when you confront statistics, the one question I answer, well, what's driving the result? What is it? Is it this? Is it the cleaning? Is it the name of the customer? Is it some particular data point? Is it something else? That's the way that's my cynical view of everything, is I look to see what it is. So the cleaning is a huge part of what we do as data scientists. I can't say I spent a lot of time on data cleaning in the book. It's not as sexy as whether grilled cheese improves your sex life, which is in the book.
Ma'am, second row here. You had a question? Yes.
In 2010, there was a law passed called plain language, which helps us understand what's written better. Forms, insurance policies, etc. Is there such an initiative, or should there be an initiative for data to have a plain language for data so people can understand?
An excellent question of the Plain Language Act and whether we could have a Clear Data Act corollary.
Obviously, I think that we should try to be as clear in presentation of numbers and data as possible. I mean, that's a big part of what I advocate for, is making sure things are as clear as possible. I haven't given a lot of thought to how you could operationalize that in terms of what would be required, right? This is the standard, this is what's required, because it does get complicated, right? There's issues with, here's the sample, what were the limitations of the collection? Then there's, what numbers did I run? How did I run it? What other kind of cuts? How did the results? So it could be quite complicated. My fear would be, could it get so complicated that we'd actually obscure more information? But in principle, the notion that simple disclosures, or sort of at least giving some of these basic things, yeah, I have no problem with that. I think that is an important part of understanding. I'll tell you, when I read a news article and I see a reporter that says something like, I was reading one on San Francisco housing prices, and there's been a big, huge spike, and then there was a dip. And the article actually said, well, we're going to need more data to determine whether the dip is a temporary blip or a trend. Like, wow, that was a thoughtful and at least informative, showing somebody's trying to explain what the data may or may not mean. Those kinds of things are worth an awful lot when you're absorbing data analyses.
Great. We have just a couple more minutes. Any other questions? Yes, sir, all the way in the back. If you could please project.
Okay.
Very good.
So, in today's world, not in the business, but in the consumer, has there been any studies on how many people actually want correct data? Because when you look at even the political campaign, people gravitate to data that supports their opinion. And you can do that in today's world with the social media.
Yep.
Or with being so connected. You just go to a different TV channel or a different website, and I always get the feeling that less than, 20% of people actually want true data, because people are lazy and they want what supports their position.
Excellent. Good question. Do people really care about getting correct data, or do they just want the numbers that support their worldview and the chart equivalent of kitten videos?
Well, we'll see how well the book sells. Look, since I said, I'm always full disclosure, I'm not aware of a study that's looked at that particular issue. It may exist. I'm not aware of that. We do talk about that very issue in the book a little bit, about the preconceived notions where you can go to the source you want to reinforce your beliefs. And so one of the questions I get related to that is, how do you take someone who's got a strongly held belief and change their mind? Well, all I can do is say, you can lay out an analytical, logical argument. You can try to inform the group of people that are willing to be open-minded, and there are some people that you won't be able to change their mind. I hope, and again, I don't have information, there's actually a larger group than 20% that are actually interested in learning more about the real information, but I don't know for sure. As I said, we'll see how my message resonates, but...
Yeah. So, yes, ma'am, quickly. So AI data, machine-generated data, and sort of how that changes the equation.
Well, the way I group it is just another form of information that we have to think about. What is the underlying data-generating process? how is the data being made. The fact that it comes from a machine doesn't mean that it's necessarily accurate. In fact, it means that it's sort of been programmed in a way to have certain sets of assumptions built in. So the same discipline that I talk about bringing to other types of data, I think is the same there, just not giving it a false sense of, a falsely elevated sense as if it's somehow better because it's machine generated. That's not enough. There are inputs that go into that. There are assumptions that go into that process. Being aware of those will help you understand it better.
Right. So we are going to need to wrap up here in just one moment, and then John will be over to the side. Anyone would like to get your book signed, he's happy to do that. If there's questions we didn't get a chance to address, can take them up offline. I do want to remind people that there's one more of the FCW Bookshelf Live sessions this afternoon at 2 o'clock with Bill Eggers. We're talking about digital government. And I want to ask one last question of you and give you the final word here. I'm tempted to go to the grilled cheese and the sex life, but most people are here presumably because they want to understand data better, and so reading the book's a good start. But as what is your advice to people who are not statisticians, who didn't, in my case, listen to their journalism professors and actually take the stats class in college? How does one get smarter about this? Is it just paying closer attention, or are there steps beyond what's in the book that we need to be doing?
Look, I come back to be aware. Numbers are not facts immediately. You have to think about them harder. Mm-hmm. Ask questions. If you think about every example I went through today with numbers and data, all of them were about starting with a question and whether the information you were looking at could answer the question correctly. That is something that every person in this audience is capable of, whether they love numbers or not. Who do they ask? What does it mean when that Starbucks is next to my house? Is it really true I'm going to get divorced if my commute's longer than 45 minutes? Another one of my favorite headlines, which is really bad for DC right now with the traffic. Yeah. That's what I would say, is really don't be afraid of it and just ask questions.
So numbers are not facts, and the plural of anecdotes is not data.
Plural of anecdote is not data.
My two favorite lines of the day. John, thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. Really appreciate it.